Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday of the Thanksgiving week, and since so many individuals are taking the time off, I want to let you know that we will be broadcasting this week and look forward to hearing from you if you'd like to join the conversation. Let me give you kind of an overview. We're going to be talking about our good friends at Six Stones Ministry in just a minute. You might remember a conversation we had with Scott Shepard about 2 years ago, and we'll come back and talk about this. It's an organization worthy of your time and involvement in terms of prayer and financial support, and especially during this end of year, this is a great time to begin to consider what you might do to support various ministries, including this one as well. And then a little bit later in the next hour, we'll be talking with Del Tackett about his engagement project. And then in the last hour, we'll have in studio with us Lori Kirkendall. She's with the Coalition for a New Sexual Revolution. Last time we had her on, we were, of course, talking about Aim for Success, which has merged with Just Say Yes. And we'll be giving us really an update on some of the battles in terms of sex education at the state board, so we'll talk about that. And later this hour, we're even going to talk about the fact that we have one more vaccine available. AstraZeneca now says that they also have a very effective vaccine, which adds to, of course, what we already know from Pfizer and Moderna, now AstraZeneca. We'll get back into some of the issues related to the election and a couple of other topics that we will put on the table. So we will have lots to talk about today and, of course, every day. This is, of course, Thanksgiving week, so on Wednesday we'll have Jerry Newcomb with us, and we'll be talking about his video on the Pilgrims and give a little bit of history on what we need to talk about. Since this last weekend was the 400th anniversary of the landing at Plymouth Rock, and on the 200th anniversary, it was a national event in which they actually had Daniel Webster deliver the address because he was considered one of the great orators at that time. Even 100 years ago, you had President McKinley and Vice President Calvin Coolidge speaking and creating the largest, if you will, traffic jam in southeast Massachusetts that ever had existed. This time, the 400th anniversary came and went, except for one speech given by the senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton. You wouldn't even know it happened. By the way, that one was criticized and ridiculed, which I think just tells a lot about where we are as a nation. So we're going to do our part to educate you, and hope you'll maybe even have your children and grandchildren listen in as we talk about the Thanksgiving week. But let's, if we can, spend some time talking about Six Tones Ministry. Jennifer Leaney is the CEO, or actually executive leader with them right now. She brings a great deal of experience in executive leadership, having worked with Volunteers of America and the Christian Community Action. And Jennifer, it is great to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Let's, if we can, educate our listeners. They may remember the conversation we had 2 years ago, but that's probably a few things have leaked out. And, of course, we've also picked up new listeners since then. So when people hear about Six Stones Ministry, talk about its history and its origin.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Six Stones Mission Network was actually formed out of Cross Cities Church. And at the time, I'll give a short story about how it started. The church was actually $6 million in debt, and they were praying about not being in debt. And so they prayed three specific prayers that really shaped the history of Six Stones. Lord, is this of you, paying down the debt? Lord, what is my part? And Lord, bless your people so they may give abundantly. And they did. And what happened in a very short time period, they paid down the full $6 million. And what the church did is, in faith, ahead of time, they bought these big 6 stones, these big markers. And every time they would pay down $1 million, they would put a big stone in their courtyard. And it still sits in the garden across the street from where we are today. And so they called that the miracle. And so the miracle continued because they paid it off in a very short time period and money still kept coming in. But then what happened that really launched 6 Stones is there was a fire in the apartment complex that's behind the church, and 4 refugee families were impacted. So they came to the church in need and saying, hey, can you help us? And what happened is because the church had been $6 million in debt, they had to put in all these rules, so they were not allowed to help these families. That really broke the heart of the church staff, because that's what the church is supposed to do, is to serve. So the pastor was up all night. He wakes up the next morning and says, we need to go start 6 Stones. I don't know what that means, but you help people physically and open the door wide spiritually. And he gave the keys of this building that I'm in that's donated to us to my predecessor, and also gave him money that came in from the miracle. It was an extra $280,000 still coming in from the miracle, and said, go serve the community, starting with these refugee families. And that's what they did.
I might just mention you're located in Bedford, in kind of what we call the mid-cities, Hurst, Euless, Bedford area. And it is just an incredible ministry that has developed. And as we sometimes are recognizing, even when we were all healthy, that there was such a need. But Jennifer, talk about what has happened because of the pandemic, the lockdowns and things of that nature. It is sort of even put some of those needs in a even more significant region, and reason why I wanted to spend some time talking with you today about what people can do to help you out.
Absolutely. There is definitely significant need. And we've got numerous programs, but I'll just talk about one and highlight the need. Our New Hope Center, which is our food pantry, our clothes closet, and that's where we really get to give out hope. So every person who comes to our New Hope Center, they meet with a hope builder, and they find out why are they here. So this is, again, trying to meet physical needs and then open the door spiritually. So every single person who enters here, they meet with a volunteer who shares the love of Jesus and hopefully plugs them back into our church partners. Last year, in pre-COVID, 2019, we served 18,000 individuals through the New Hope Center. This year, we're on track. We've served over 34,000. So to say that there is significant increase in need is definitely an understatement.
Let me just take a break, and when we come back, talk about how people can get involved. Certainly, there is a way in which you can be a mentor, you can give, you can be part of the New Hope Center. And as we go to a break, this would be a great time for you to go to the website. Now, we have it linked on our website, but if you want to go directly, it's 6stones.org, and it's the number 6 and then stones.org. There you can find out more about their community-powered revitalization. You can find out more about their mentoring program. We just, of course, talked about this idea of the New Hope Center. Of course, they have a Night of Hope, Operation Back to School, which, of course, has been in the past, but there's certainly some opportunities there. So we're going to talk about different ways that you can participate, and especially as we come into this week of Thanksgiving and then into the Christmas season and year-end, I really want you to consider what you might want to do. One of the best ways in which you can reach out to your community, or maybe even pass on this legacy of providing hope, is to get your children or even your grandchildren involved. And so I hope that you will see what you might be able to do with 6 Stones Ministry. And if you find yourself saying, well, I need to find out a little bit more, you can go to the website, which we have at our website, pointofview.net, or simply go to 6stones.org. And as you go there, you'll find some great ways in which you can participate, and I hope you'll be praying about how you can actually participate in some of these various outreaches and activities. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Jennifer right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before Thanksgiving and Christmas push the election from our minds, we need to remind ourselves how wildly inaccurate polling organizations were in 2020. We should recognize that political polling has always been an inaccurate science. Kristen Soltis Anderson reminds us that in 1936, Literary Digest declared Alf Landon would be the next president. The Gallup organization that year got it right, only to later be embarrassed by being on the wrong side of the Dewey defeats Truman upset. 4 years ago, the pollsters did not predict that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton. We were assured that they caught their mistakes and would be more accurate this time. A few hours into the election night, it was obvious that these pollsters were wrong not only with the presidential race, but with the races for U.S. Senate along with the races for state legislatures. Back in 2012, the polls were off because pollsters didn't call enough cell phones. Then in 2016, they were off because they missed voters without college degrees. This time, the critics said they were missing the shy Trump voters. But in a previous commentary, I mentioned that most pollsters denied this group even existed. And the argument might work for the presidential race, but it certainly can't explain why there was no huge blue wave for the House, Senate, and state legislatures. Another argument being used is the Trump factor. He is a polarizing figure in American politics. That may explain why the presidential polls were accurate in Maine and South Carolina, but it fails to explain why the polls were so far off in the Senate contest in those states. While the pollsters are trying to figure all this out, I have a recommendation for you. Don't trust the polls. Perhaps they will fix their survey techniques over time, but we don't have to listen to them until they do. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
As you know, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, we are certainly on the national level, and we're talking to dozens and dozens of schools and states around the country. But this particular hour, we have primarily most of you listening from the state of Texas, which is why I wanted to feature Six Stones Ministry. But if you happen to be listening in, and I know some of you do from other parts of the country, I should really encourage you to find out what is going on in your community, because in most cases, as we are dealing with these issues, they are really local issues, and there's an opportunity for you to reach out through various community outreaches. But I wanted, especially for those of you that are listening in the Dallas area, to know more about Six Stones, and it is a catalyst of hope. Jennifer, let's, if we can, come back to this idea of the New Hope Center. A lot of people are saying, okay, well, what can we do? Obviously, because of the limitations of the pandemic, you have been limited to how you can reach out, but there are still great opportunities to reach out to those in the community with food and clothing and other resources. So talk about how people can get involved in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, just like everybody else, we had to put the social distancing in place the week of March 16th, and so we did a drive-through for quite a while for the New Hope Center. Always praying through the passenger side window. And to me, it was really interesting. We could see how the pandemic really moved from other parts of the world to here based on the prayers people said to us. We were able to open up back in person in September, and we figured out how to socially distance. So here, when you come to our New Hope Center, we go through all the right protocols, but we do like to meet in person with our guests, wearing masks and in rooms big enough where we can spread out. and we can share the hope of Jesus, and they can get food and clothing, and we can help them with other needs. So all of our volunteer opportunities are definitely online. We do have a fair amount of volunteer opportunities in our New Hope Center, as well as some other things that we have upcoming for Christmas and some other events like our community power revitalization, which you mentioned.
Sure. I'm going to get to Christmas in just a minute, but while we're talking about volunteer,
Okay.
One of the things I love is you can click on volunteer and you can see, okay, this week's pretty much full, but even by next week, there are some opportunities for people to sign up. One volunteer, 5 volunteer, 2 volunteers. So you can pick the time, the date, and if you have young people, for example, that need to do some kind of community service, this would be one idea. If you say, well, I'd just like to get my family involved with that, you can click on that little button that says volunteer now. Those of you that are good at lifting things, and I'm still pretty good at that. Truck drivers, heavy lifters, there's a place there. And, of course, you can always give. So those are some great resources that you can find by going to sixstones.org. But it is getting close to the Christmas season, and there is an opportunity for, I think it's more than 3,000 children and families to benefit from some of the involvement. So talk about that.
Yes, absolutely. We are in a very diverse area here. It's actually the 4th most diverse school district in the United States. And this year we're going to serve over 3,300 students who are economically challenged. So they would not have Christmas. So we have purchased gifts ahead of time in faith, just as Six Stones was started with purchasing those 6 miracle rocks. So we need people to sponsor the children. So it's $65 can help make one child's dreams come true for Christmas, or $260 for 4 children, or $1,300 is for a whole classroom. And we need a lot of volunteers. So I'll tell you very briefly, in a non-COVID year, what Night of Hope is the 22 elementary schools that are in the Hearst, Euless, Bedford area. We have churches adopt every one of them, and basically they throw a party. They throw a party at the school, and they share the gospel. So to me, even in my 20 years of Christian, never seen it where on school property we get to share. So that happens. And then again, this is in a non-COVID year, the kids stay in one room and do a craft for their parents, and the parents go and, quote, shop for their kids. And that's where all the items are for their children, and they put them in big black trash bags and go smuggle them to their car so they get to be the hero on Christmas morning. And they also get food, so they get to give the food and just have a normal Christmas celebration in whatever their faith tradition is. So that's non-COVID. So in COVID, we are going to do a drive-through for Night of Hope. Mm-hmm. Half of the churches have decided to do it. Still, we are allowed on Pennington Field, which is the high school stadium. So still on church property, we are going to share the gospel. And we have one church, it's actually First Colleyville, that's taking the lead on it this year. They are they're going to have snow blowers out in the parking lot, and they've got 8 biblical messages that they are going to make sure get passed on to every family that comes. And they will be transmitting the message through the AM/FM car radio. So the church partners are being very creative. So half of the parties are still on church or on school property, and then the other half of the 22 schools will be at the actual churches. So this year it is all drive-through, and we will pray with the families, but we definitely need volunteer help to make that happen for 3,300 students who would not get Christmas otherwise.
And again, that's that first full week in December. And you again can click on there and find out where it's happening in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And again, you can also see whether it's in Pennington Field or the church and those kinds of things. So you still need volunteers. You still need people to give and to sponsor. So whether an individual can actually go out that particular week and participate, there's still some financial needs as well, isn't there?
That is 100% correct.
Okay. One last time, we did also mention out the kind of the community-powered revitalization, and that is a great opportunity for somebody who knows how to use a hammer, nail, saw, those kinds of things, because in many cases you're talking about various kinds of repairs, maybe somebody that has plumbing expertise, electrical expertise. Talk about what might be available there.
Absolutely. We work with the cities, 4 cities actually, Hearst, Euless, Bedford, and Grapevine. And they put us in their budget, and they qualify people who can't afford to fix their homes. These are veterans, and these are elderly primarily, but there's also some of our neighbors who just can't afford it. And we typically bring in thousands of volunteers to come fix their homes. So we have to socially distance right now. So in a non-COVID year, we are typically doing a big blitz every April and October. But because of COVID and us socially distanced, we only bring 10 people to each home. Mm-hmm. So what that means is our program has spread a little bit from just the 2 times a year to making it doing repairs all year long. So you'll see opportunities on the website where somebody can click and sign up. And this is a great group. If people want to, they're already working together with a company, they can volunteer together, or a family, or you can sign up with other people. So it could be fixing somebody's fencing. It could be painting, just general home repairs. And again, these are for people who can't afford it, or they're elderly and they just cannot do the repairs anymore.
So again, you can find all this information at 6stones.org. It's the number 6 and then stones.org. That will then allow you to certainly focus on a couple of things. And we've been kind of featuring the New Hope Center, or also, of course, what will be taking place that first full week of December will be the Night of Hope. But it's a drive-through now, so it's a little bit different than what has been existing before. And then those of you that have any kind of ability to deal with repairs, we mentioned, of course, the community-powered revitalization. There's also mentoring and a variety of other things. So if nothing else, Jennifer, I appreciate you taking some time to join with us today. And I really want to just challenge our listeners to recognize that as we come into this Thanksgiving season and in the Christmas season, this is an opportunity for you to reach out and make a difference in the lives of individuals that will certainly not only benefit from the financial resources that you are making available to them, the food and clothing and other things, but also will have a chance to hear the gospel. So thank you so very much for your leadership, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. Would I be able to highlight one more program?
Please do.
Okay, we also have a mentor program called Momentum. And really, we are taking the favor that God has really bestowed upon this ministry and trying to go deeper and help our neighbors who are in need. So what we do is we pair up people who are sitting in our churches, maybe with spiritual gifts laying dormant, and pair them up with our neighbors in need. So this is also a program that's all year long, but because we see the need is so great. The mentorship program is a 6-month commitment, and you meet the first 8 weeks of it are in person in basically a classroom style, and we are helping people with physical needs as well as spiritual needs.
That's good.
So if you're interested in being a mentor, the only requirement is you get a letter from your church, basically say you're in good standing. And if you are a mentee, anybody who needs help, we will serve anybody. The only requirement for a mentee is if you can work, you will work. So anybody over 18 years old, they would need to help to get a job.
Again, Six Stones Ministry. We have all that information on our website. We'll come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. Let's see if we can get you up to date on some of the things that are happening. First of all, on the issue of the coronavirus, we now have a third vaccine, and this is pretty amazing, and we'll come back and talk about the significance of it in just a minute. But this piece that came out points out that AstraZeneca now has announced today that its vaccine candidate, developed, as we mentioned before, at Oxford, is up to 90% effective in preventing COVID-19, and it becomes the third such candidate to meet that threshold. As we've mentioned, that would be Pfizer and Moderna. Now, what's so interesting is this is almost counterintuitive, because they found that when you give people 2 full doses of the vaccine, most of these vaccines require you get 1 dose, a month later you take a second one, but they found that when you had 2 full doses of the vaccine given at least a month apart, it appeared to be only about 62% effective in preventing the disease. However, they found that if you gave a half dose followed by a full dose, it was 90% effective. So it's kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Again, AstraZeneca has said that no severe cases of the virus or hospitalizations were found among the subjects receiving the vaccine. And so it will now also seek emergency authorization in countries to allow for the conditional approval. Because this is developed in England, you do have to wonder if it might actually be used more in England and in the United States, but I don't see anything in this article that says one way or the other, but it's something to think about. Pfizer, of course, is moving ahead, trying to get emergency approval, and if that is the case by next month, and of course December is next month, it's next week, you can begin to realize that that could happen very quickly. Now, Gary Bauer, who's been with us before on Friday, pointed out that yesterday's, he said, which would be Thursday's White House briefing, was quite a commentary on what has been accomplished by this administration. And he points out, as I just mentioned a minute ago, that Pfizer is now applying for an emergency use authorization against a vaccine, as he reminds us, of a virus we only learned about in January. So this all happened within a year. Usually, he points out that it takes many years to develop a new vaccine, and this time it took only months. So what about all the complaints or the criticism, the fear, for example, from the governor of New York and others? Well, again, Dr. Anthony Fauci, on that particular Thursday briefing, made it clear that no corners were cut. This was due in large part to some of the technological breakthroughs that were advanced during the Trump administration. And so Fauci said speed did not compromise at all safety, nor did it compromise scientific integrity. It was a reflection of the extraordinary scientific advances in these types of vaccines. By the way, these are different kinds of vaccines. I've tried to explain that before, but you can look that up and find out more if you'd like. Once the FDA approves the vaccine, mass distribution of millions of doses will begin, are you ready for this? Within 24 to 48 hours of approval. So they are definitely gearing up on that regard. Now, Gary Bauer couldn't resist making a comment. He said yesterday's summary of what has taken place with the development of the vaccine, he says, stands in stark contrast to the rollout of the Obamacare website, or even what Joe Biden had said in a press conference just a few hours before, because Biden said, I'm not going to shut down the economy, I'm going to shut down the virus. But, okay, where does the virus and the vaccine fit in all of those particular issues? Because he said what you saw in Biden's statement is he's setting the stage right now with the hope of the media to claim credit next year if he wins. Of course, I think that's becoming more of a foregone conclusion when the vaccines were developed under the Trump-Pence administration. And he said if people like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden had any decency, he said they would have been apologizing for undermining the integrity of the vaccine. And I think this is going to be a perfect opportunity for heads I win, tails you lose. If the vaccine is successful, it's all due to, of course, the Biden administration. And if there's any problems, well, that we'll just blame on the Trump administration. And we sort of see how that takes place all the time in American politics. One of the individuals who I thought we might feature for just a minute is Dr. Ben Carson. As you know, he is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. As you may know, he has had the coronavirus. And the other day, on his Twitter post, he actually said something that got my attention. I'll read the first part. I'm convinced that Donald Trump's assistance saved my life. Of course, he doesn't give total credit just to the president. He says, thank you, everyone, for their support and prayers while my wife, that would be Candy, and I battled COVID-19. And so he went on to talk a little bit about some of this as well. You know, we've gotten away from prayer and faith. A lot of this country, there's nothing wrong with godly principles, no matter what your faith. So he was really talking about the fact that he appreciates the prayers, but he also appreciates what Donald Trump and the administration has done. Here's kind of a lengthy look at what he said. He said, President Trump, I love this, the fabulous White House medical team, and the phenomenal doctors at Walter Reed have been paying very close attention to my health, and I do believe I'm out of the woods at this point. He points out the fact that I was extremely sick and initially took Oleander 4 times with dramatic improvement. However, I have several comorbidities, and after a brief period when I was only experiencing minor discomfort, the symptoms accelerated and I became desperately ill. So then he went on to say that President Trump was following my condition and cleared me for the monoclonal antibody therapy that had been previously received, which I am convinced saved my life. Then Ben Carson went on to say, I am hopeful that we can stop playing politics with medicine and instead combine our efforts and goodwill for the good of all people. While I am blessed to have the best medical care in the world, and I'm convinced it saved my life, we must prioritize getting comparable treatments and care to everyone as soon as possible. And so he closes by saying, together we'll be victorious because why? God is still in control. So, if nothing else, continue to pray, if you have not been doing so, for Dr. Ben Carson, who is convinced he may have lost his life because of COVID-19 and is convinced that he is alive today because of the great work of the surgeons and the doctors at Walter Reed, and due to the opportunity to have access to some of these antibody treatments and others due to the work of President Donald Trump. Just before we take a break, let me just mention after the break we'll get into some of the issues of the election. But if you are looking for some kind of last-minute switch or change, that's starting to wind down, because today you have two of those important swing states which are set to certify the election. Once the election is certified, that then clears those particular electors for that individual that won that state, and in both cases that would be Joe Biden, for them to go to Lansing, Michigan, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and declare those electoral votes for Joe Biden. Nevada is scheduled to certify their election tomorrow. So you start seeing that the window is closing pretty quickly in that regard. And you might say, well, okay, what about some of the other legal challenges? Well, the most significant challenge was the one in Pennsylvania. And Saturday night, the U.S. District Judge, that'd be Matthew Braun, threw out the lawsuit from the Trump campaign seeking to prevent the certification of Pennsylvania's vote tallies and reject those vote tallies, and to actually remove certain votes that came in after the fact, after the election, from being tallied. And, of course, that seemed to be the sort of obvious action that would be taking place there. And one other thing I'll mention just before we take a break, Over the weekend, no doubt you saw that the Trump campaign made it very clear that Sidney Powell is not part of the Trump legal team, and said that she is not a lawyer for the president in her personal capacity. So I've posted that one for you to read. Since then, you've actually had a comment by Sidney Powell, who said, I understand today's press release. I will continue to represent #WeThePeople, who had their votes for Trump and other Republicans stolen by massive fraud through Dominion and Smartmatic, and will be filing suit soon. The chips will fall where they may, and we will defend the foundations of this great republic. She's been arguing that Trump won by a landslide, and as a lot of people have been saying, many fellow conservatives, okay, it's time to put up. But so far, we haven't seen any of that. We'll come back and talk about a couple other issues that are on the table, and that is going to happen right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let's see if we can also talk about the election. It is winding down, but I think we've learned some lessons. And one of the best articles I thought I might put on the website for you to read comes from Ken Blackwell. You might say, well, who is he? First of all, he was the former Secretary of State of Ohio, individual that has been with the Family Research Council, African-American. I think it's important to recognize because sometimes every time you point out any kind of election fraud fraud or any concerns, they say, well, you're just trying to suppress the African-American vote and all of the rest. So he titles this the greatest election heist in history. And apart from the kind of wild speculation that we've seen in some of the press conferences, he provides material that is very well documented and something that needs to be mentioned as well. At the end, you can say, well, we don't necessarily know that there was fraud, but we know there were some plans to make sure that we would change as many of the rules involving elections as possible. And so I think it illustrates, again, going forward, what can we do? And another piece, which is the second article I've posted by Bert Peterson, to restore election integrity and mail-in vote fraud. I think it is kind of interesting, and I've got a commentary coming out next week, that mail-in ballots are not allowed in most of the advanced Western European countries in the world. But we have mail-in ballots. Also, interesting enough, there are certain countries that don't have electronic voting. Canada is a good example of this as well. And so if you really want to say, well, let's do what other nations do, well, that would be very different than the messed up system that we have here. In part, as Kelly Shackelford pointed out on Friday, due to the fact that the Constitution allows states to actually develop their own system. But if you have any kind of corruption in the states, or as we're going to see in just a minute, pushes from various groups to move in certain directions, it, I think, is why we have to consider whether or not we could at least have some national standards. The states can do what they want, but at least certain kind of non-negotiable standards so that we don't have the kind of disaster that we've had here before. And so, again, Ken Blackwell, who has researched this and actually worked with a group called the Amistad Project, said that the story of all of this really begins back in January of 2017, when Barack Obama's former campaign manager and senior advisor, David Plouffe, took a job leading the policy and advocacy efforts of an initiative by Mark Zuckerberg, which is, quote, a charitable organization put together by Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan. Well, to understand that, all you have to do is get a copy of David Plouffe's book, which is entitled, what? A Citizen's Guide to Defeating Donald Trump. And this really, in some respects, lays out what was actually planned. Now, under the pretext, supposedly, of assisting election officials conduct safe and secure elections, Mark Zuckerberg donated $400 million, as much money as Congress appropriated for the same general purpose, to nonprofit organizations founded and basically run by left-wing activists. The primary recipient was the Center for Tech and Civil Life, which received a staggering $350 million. Yes, it was receiving the lion's share of all of that. And prior to the donations, the annual operating expenses were about $1 million a year. So you can see that basically he just sort of, if you will, with the funding, took over an organization. And then this Center for Tech and Civil Life itself began to develop all sorts of ways in which to start to influence some of these battleground states. But then, as Ken Blackwell points out, Zuckerberg and the Center for Tech and Civil Life left nothing to chance, wrote detailed conditions into their grants that they provided, dictating how elections were to be conducted, down to even the number of ballot drop boxes and polling places. The Constitution, of course, as we pointed out, gives state lawmakers sole authority for managing elections, but these grants, in a sense, put these private interests firmly in control. Well, then he goes on to say that the left didn't put all of its eggs in even the Center for Tech and Civil Life basket, though. High-ranking state officials simultaneously, he points out, took significant steps to weaken ballot security protocols, acting on their own authority without permission or concurrence from the state legislatures that actually had these protections. And then he goes through, and I would encourage you to read this when you have a moment, to show what happened in Wisconsin under the Secretary of State, who's a Democrat, then what happened in Michigan, which happened under that Democrat Secretary of State, and then in Pennsylvania, which we just talked about a minute ago, where even though you have the Republican legislature and some other things, you still have officials in heavily Democratic counties receiving the funds from that Center for Tech and Civil Life. And so you begin to see where the money goes in all of those cases. Then that wasn't enough. In numerous states, officials also consolidated the vote counting and ballot curing process in sporting arenas rather than in the various wards and precinct levels that is the case. Now, the argument was COVID-19, but that's ridiculous because it probably would have been safer in some of those small venues. But now by consolidating the vote counting, this tied all of these efforts together. And instead of a manageable number of ballots being transported to small offices and counted in the immediate presence of observers from both parties, truckloads of these ballots were brought into a single location, inevitably resulting in confusing, commingling the ballots from various sources, and trying to secure those ballots from time to time. They left voters' hands. You never really had this kind of chain of command that was the case. Then you had one other thing I'll add, and that is what's called ballot curing. That's a process where, and we've shown this on video before, where election officials fill out new ballots on behalf of voters whose ballots, quote, could not be read by the machines. And this could be done something that the voter themselves didn't, so maybe there was coffee spilled on it or whatever. But again, almost all of those were done without individuals from both parties watching to check to see whether or not those individuals filling out the ballots were only filling those out. And so crumpled ballots that in one way or another were not necessarily in good shape, allowed them to fill out those ballots. Now, does that mean all of this was done with the intent to ensure voter fraud? Not necessarily. Did it provide an opportunity for voter fraud possibly to take place? Absolutely. And so, again, this is, I think, such a good article because instead of generating all sorts of great conspiracies, it's just simply documenting what we do know happened, and we know who paid for it, and we know who did it. And so if you read these 3 pages, you'll be convinced that we, for one reason or another, engaged in an experiment that I hope never gets repeated once again. The second article, which we won't get to, is one on to restore election integrity and mail-in vote fraud, and that one is by Bert Peterson, and just an illustration again of some of the really important things that have to take place in the future if we really want to have something like election integrity. After all, we're doing things in this country that aren't even being done in Canada, aren't even being done in most European countries, aren't even being done in places like Brazil. But we do it here, and I think you can illustrate very quickly the potential for fraud is very great because we are violating some of the norms that we require from other countries to actually engage in order to assure election integrity in those countries. We'll be back right after this.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. It's our Thanksgiving week. Yes, we're live, and we encourage you to join with us as we talk about some very important issues. I'm going to give you kind of an update on what's happening. Then we're going to be talking with our good friend Del Tackett about his engagement project. Next hour, Lori Kirkendall, who is with the Medical Institute for Sexual Health and the Coalition for a New Sexual Revolution. We'll talk about sex education. We'll get into all of those issues as well. But let me give you just kind of a brief overview of what has been taking place over the weekend and even this morning, in which AstraZeneca announced that now their vaccine is also 90% effective. It's been developed over there in Oxford. Kind of an interesting one because, of course, you already have Pfizer and Moderna who have developed vaccines that are more than 90% effective. This one is most intriguing because they found that when you gave people 2 doses of the vaccine a month apart, that it was only about 62% effective. However, when they gave people half a dose, followed by a full dose, it was 90% effective. So kind of intriguing and not necessarily what you would expect, kind of counterintuitive. So again, they are going to be spending some time looking at this. Of course, there were no cases, at least severe cases, of the virus or hospitalizations that took place. They will now be seeking emergency authorization in countries that allow for conditional approval. Since it's happening there in the UK, because this was developed there at Oxford, might be developed more for the UK, but we might have access to some of those here in this country. And of course, Pfizer has already applied for emergency approval, so we'll see where that takes us. But it is quite possible by a week or 2 from now, we'll see. Because once approval is granted, they hope to have those doses available within 24 hours to 48 hours. So in December, that first vaccine might be available. And of course, then you'd have to have it twice. So we'll see where it goes. But that is incredible news. And of nothing else, an illustration of just the remarkable speed of Operation Warp Speed. Just recognize this time last year, nobody even knew of this virus. And here we're talking about a vaccine for it. Usually vaccines take years, actually. And Dr. Anthony Fauci the other day in the press conference, if you did not see that, did say that no corners were cut and that he is confident with that. So we'll see where it goes. But nevertheless, just wanted to give you that update on that vaccine. Let's get into the election real quickly. We will probably cover more of that tomorrow. But let me just mention that today is when both Michigan and Pennsylvania are to certify the election results. For those of you living in Michigan and Pennsylvania, you'll see that in your news. Tomorrow, Nevada. And you might say, well, what about those lawsuits? Well, the most significant lawsuit was the one in Pennsylvania, and over the weekend, that would be Saturday night, you have U.S. District Judge Matthew Braun threw out the Trump campaign's lawsuit seeking to prevent the certification of the Pennsylvania vote tallies. And so, as far as we can tell, those are moving forward. Once a vote has been certified, The electors then go to their respective cities, or capitals, I should say, Lansing, Michigan, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, whatever, and cast those votes in those cases for Joe Biden. So we'll see where that is. One of the other things that happened over the weekend was the statement by the Trump campaign that Sidney Powell, who we talked about on Friday and talked about also on Thursday last week, is, quote, not a member of the Trump legal team. She's not a lawyer for the president in his personal capacity. Okay. I posted an article that gives you that information in case you did not have a chance to see it. I think it is, our third article that we've posted here on the website. And since then, Sidney Powell has posted, I understand today's press conference. I will continue to represent #We the People who had their votes for Trump and other Republicans stolen by massive fraud through Dominion and Smartmatic, and will be filing suit soon, she says. Went on to say, the chips will fall where they may, and we will defend the foundations of this great republic. She, in other places, has made the statement that the president, that is President Trump, won by a landslide. We're going to prove it. We're going to reclaim the United States of America for the people who vote for freedom. Okay, I think it is now time to put up, because she said the evidence I'm compiling is overwhelming that this software tool was used to shift millions of votes from President Trump and other Republican candidates to Biden and other Democratic candidates. We are proceeding to prepare our lawsuit and plan to file it this week. So we'll see. We're waiting, and I can't say anything more than that. Don't know any more, and even individuals that know Sidney Powell can't really tell us much more about this. So we'll just sit and wait. But the bottom line is certification is continuing on, and it makes this even more sort of a Hail Mary kind of action. One of the things I wanted to focus your attention on is the two articles I've posted. One by Ken Blackwell. You might say, who is he? Well, he was the former Secretary of State for the state of Ohio, and also is with the Family Research Council, and it has a very well-documented piece on the greatest election heist in history. This one is not full of speculation, as of some of these other statements have been made. This is well-documented, in which he points out that starting back in January 2017, individual that had been the former campaign manager for Barack Obama, David Plouffe, took the job of leading the policy and advocacy efforts of the initiative put together by Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. If you want to understand more, you can even read his book, because it was called The Citizen's Guide to Defeating Donald Trump, and put together some of the funding that Mark Zuckerberg provided, about $400 million, most of it going to a group called the Center for Tech and Civil Life, which was working to try to change some of the election rules, which they did. And also to begin to work with, for example, in Wisconsin, the Democrat Secretary of State there, in Michigan, the Democratic Secretary of State there, and also even in Pennsylvania, working with some of the heavily Democratic counties to begin to change the way we count the votes by moving them into sporting arenas and large venues, and then even developing what's called ballot curing. Because if you've ever seen some of the videos, you sometimes see individuals and election workers actually filling out blank ballots. Now, the theory is what they're doing is that there is a ballot that had coffee spilled on it, it was crumpled, or was not read by the machine. Theoretically, they're filling out a new ballot so that it can run through the machines. But, of course, a lot of this was taking place without people from both parties watching it. So this particular article really goes and documents some of this, which is a part of the public record. And then the other article I have is by Bert Peterson, in which he points out, as we quote from Hans von Spakovsky, the fact that we have entirely too many people on the voter rolls. And so how could you go back and even check for that? Because even if you could find that a dead person did send in a ballot, well, then how do you know how they voted? And so you, again, run into the difficulty of, even after the fact, even if you were to do any kind of audit, to catch any of the fraud that's taking place. So these two articles, I think, do a good job of talking about why we don't need to be doing this in the future. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before Thanksgiving and Christmas push the election from our minds, we need to remind ourselves how wildly inaccurate polling organizations were in 2020. We should recognize that political polling has always been an inaccurate science. Kristen Soltis Anderson reminds us that in 1936, Literary Digest declared Alf Landon would be the next president. The Gallup organization that year got it right, only to later be embarrassed by being on the wrong side of the Dewey defeats Truman upset. 4 years ago, the pollsters did not predict that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton. We were sure that they caught their mistakes and would be more accurate this time. A few hours into the election night, it was obvious that these pollsters were wrong not only with the presidential race, but with the races for U.S. Senate along with the races for state legislatures. Back in 2012, the polls were off because pollsters didn't call enough cell phones. Then in 2016, they were off because they missed voters without college degrees. This time, the critics said they were missing the shy Trump voters. But in a previous commentary, I mentioned that most pollsters denied this group even existed. And the argument might work for the presidential race, but it certainly can't explain why there was no huge blue wave for the House, Senate, and state legislatures. Another argument being used is the Trump factor. He is a polarizing figure in American politics. That may explain why the presidential polls were accurate in Maine and South Carolina, but it fails to explain why the polls were so far off in the Senate contest in those states. While the pollsters are trying to figure all of this out, I have a recommendation for you. Don't trust the polls. Perhaps they will fix their survey techniques over time, but we don't have to listen to them until they do. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend some time now talking with our good friend Del Tackett. You are no doubt familiar with the Truth Project. After all, this was such a successful endeavor. Generated small groups in over 130 different countries. Probably about 15 million people attended the study. He is, of course, a worldview author and teacher. His current focus is on what is called the Engagement Project, which we'll talk about in just a minute, which really helps you walk through kind of the 5 epics of human history. If you're not familiar with him, of course, I know many of you have actually gone through the Truth Project study, but of course, he has been involved in Focus on the Family as the executive vice president for 10 years, also served as the president of the Leadership Institute, and back before that, even had been with George Herbert Walker Bush's administration, served at the White House as a director of technical planning for the National Security Council. But Del Tackett, always great to have you on the program.
What a pleasure to be with you.
Let's, if we can, for a few people that maybe are not familiar with the Truth Project, and probably a small group because it got such visibility, because in some respects, to understand the Engagement Project, you have to understand the Truth Project, don't you?
Well, I think so. I mean, this Truth Project was an attempt to try and help build what I call the comprehensive, systematic biblical worldview in the believer, and I just think that's critical before we even talk about what it means to engage the culture around us.
And again, the concern that we have and the purpose of it is that we do have very few people that have a biblical worldview. on a pretty regular basis, we bring George Barna on this program, and whether it's George Barna and now the Barna Research Group with a variety of others, Dave Kinnaman and others, almost every study I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen the same and probably seen others, show that most people who maybe are saved in their hearts are not saved in their heads. They may be Christians, they may go to church, they may pray, they may read their Bibles, but they don't have a biblical worldview. Fair?
I believe that's exactly right, and I think that's what the Barna folks have shown, and actually I think it's probably worse than what their surveys show, because they're basing theirs upon 10 basic questions, and I think a biblical worldview is much deeper than that. And so I think our illiteracy when it comes to viewing the world around us from the perspective of what God has said and how He's designed the world around us, I think we're even more worse off than even the 9 or 7%.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can, and like you said, that's one of those things that I think is so striking, is that when you look at the Barna research and others, they will look at what I kind of consider kind of basic Sunday school information. And
Yes.
what we're looking at is something a little bit broader. And when we start talking about now the engagement project, if you're going to engage the world, you have to be thinking not just about who Jesus was and what the Bible is, but how a Christian would think about business, how a Christian would think about politics, how a Christian would think about economics. And that's one of the reasons you've put the engagement project together, right?
That's exactly right. We're hoping and praying that we'll be able to see the body of Christ recognize and understand what I believe is that God has entrusted the primary work of the kingdom to the common Christian family. I don't think we have that kind of a vision, but I think He's called us to that so that we might begin to engage those who live around us, and we need to engage them with a proper biblical worldview.
And so let's, if we can, talk about what that looks like, because I know that as we send people to deltacket.com, they're going to find all sorts of information. Of course, COVID-19 has kind of changed the things, hasn't it?
It really has. I don't, it's almost trite to say these things now, but no one could have ever, I think, predicted what we've seen in 2020. But I think this is the kind of thing in which the body of Christ should be prepared for. We are the people who understand what true, real relationships look like in a world which, I think the enemy is trying to destroy those relationships.
So again, let's see if we can kind of talk about some of the modules that are part of this engagement project, because it really gets into a variety of different areas, doesn't it?
Well, it does. We're going to try to overall help people gaze upon what I believe is the crown jewel in the nature of God. And it should all come back to who God is and understanding His nature and character. That's what we did in the Truth Project. We tried to point people to the very nature of God. And we're going to do the same thing in the Engagement Project. And so we're going to look at each of the major epics in the meta-narrative of God and search for that and what that means to us today.
And so again, I've got a piece on your website right now. What happens when we gaze upon the face of God, and it also awakens us to His truth, transforms us, and calls us to engage the world around us, and then restore. So let's take each one of those for a minute. The first idea of awaken, what does that imply? And again, you've got videos that go with each one of those, so I encourage people to go and check them out. But what do we mean by awakening to God's truth?
Well, I think it's the basic thing that happens when we come into the presence of God. I love to refer to Isaiah and his encounter with the living God. And he said, "My eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." And he has radically changed. In fact, he even recognizes, he says, "Woe is me, I'm undone, for I'm a man of unclean lips." That's what happens to us when we come into the presence of God. We're exposed. We live in a culture that we wear masks. We do all kinds of things to try to be significant. and the eyes of the world around us. But you can't do that in the presence of God. He not only exposes us, but we begin to understand more who he is. And when we do, that should awaken us. It should radically change us. And remember, Isaiah, at the end of all this, said, here am I, send me.
And so, again, that gets into the engaged. But, again, if we see the world the way God sees it, after all, we want to think God's thoughts after him if we're trying to really develop a biblical worldview. It even gets into this issue of reality, because one of the questions you say, do you really believe that what you believe is really real? And or is it just a Sunday school story that or a fairy tale? So that's a very important part of that awaken part, isn't it?
Oh, it really, really is. It is easy for us to begin to act and even speak in ways in which we think we're going to gain significance by doing that. And then I think that happens in the church. It happens with our young people. The old joke about what's the right answer in Sunday school, Jesus. And we learn that kind of a thing to say and how to act in our Christian circles. But the question is, do we really believe it? Do we believe that it's really real? And, one of the things that Jesus did was he was continually connecting the truth of God with the reality of the world around us. That's what happened in the boat, with the wind and the rain and the storm, and these weathered fishermen were fearing for their lives. And Jesus stood up and just simply spoke, and it all became calm. And they saw, they said, "Who is this man?" Because they saw that all these things that Jesus was saying now became real because they saw what he had done. That's the power of the resurrection, is it not?
Yes.
It's the power of God, the reality of the risen Lord now puts a stamp of authority upon the truth that he had claimed.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we've talked about awaken. And by the way, if you're taking some notes, you might number 1 to 3, awaken, then engage and restore. But again, this is talking about reality. And one of the mistakes I think sometimes we make is we refer to them as Bible stories. And of course, a story can be mean in different ways, but sometimes it's like, well, it didn't really happen. And so that gets us back to this issue of reality. So we're going to talk about, and have been talking about, how in a sense, when we gaze upon the face of God, it awakens us to his truth. Then we'll come back and talk about, then it transforms us and calls us to engage. And of course, that's the second part of what we talked about with Isaiah. And then finally to restore. So if you find yourself saying, well, I want to know more about this, maybe you've already participated in the Truth Project and you'd like to know more about the Engagement Project, we have information about it at our website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to deltacket.com, and that will get you some of that information as well. And if you have any comments or questions as we're talking about worldview, maybe you've participated in the Truth Project or wonder what we should do to engage culture, we'll open up the phones too, because I know both of us would enjoy hearing from you. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.